Hi, greetings. Welcome back to our podcast, What Now? On the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. A podcast in partnership with Hospice Peterborough. I'm Julie Brown, and I'm here with my friends and colleagues.
David Kennedy.
And Red Keating.
Welcome back. It's nice to be back here in the studio again today.
Here we are.
Today, this is a subject, the value of the vigil. So sitting bedside as someone dies. And it's something that all of us identified as a topic that we really wanted to give some time to, actually quite a few months ago. And so here we are today, just to start opening the conversation about that there is value in the vigil, in those final hours and days, maybe even a week sometimes, of sitting bedside. So let's begin there.
Well, it certainly is something that I've heard and witnessed and experienced, that time frame. And I think the first thing I note about it is there is no definite time frame to it. It's just we're here and it's up and down because you can think it's going to be hours and then it stretches out. And people often convey to me the idea that this waiting is really hard. It's hard to wait. And yet, I do, like you said at the beginning, Julie, I do believe that there's great value that can be encountered during this waiting time.
I think it's that powerlessness that comes from sitting there knowing that there's nothing more to do but just be present. And I think we have a really hard time just being present in the moment, because you never know how long the moment's going to be. It can be too short, it can be too long. And that unknown time frame, along with our discomfort or our lack of practice at just being present. Life is so busy, it's go, 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 go. And when we're sort of put in that place where we just stop with one thing to do, be there. That's difficult. And it is really hard work. It is exhausting.
It is exhausting.
To the bone, exhausting.
And that you will hear often, don't we? Family members say, "Why am I so tired? All I've been doing is sitting here." Because it is big, important, hard work. And yes, you're not physically moving around, but there's so much that is happening that makes it so draining.
I think it's a time where it's really up to that person who's dying. They're the ones that are really in control of this, and I have found it's hard to sit there and not and continually resist the urge to get up and do something, because there's this idea I need to go do something that's productive. And it doesn't feel productive just sitting here being and watching and being with this person. But again, I think that oftentimes where the value in the moment isn't seen. It's later on when we reflect back.
That's right.
That time, often people will start to talk about the meaning that comes out of that time. And but it's not really evident in the moment, that's for sure.
So I think, what I'm hearing you guys say is, as Red mentioned, there's the powerlessness, it's our helplessness. We feel out of control, right? And as human beings, that's a really hard place for us to be in. And this the pausing from the busyness of our lives, of the doing, and it really is practicing being a human being in the moment, right? And so and bearing witness to what unfolds, knowing that we don't get to control the process of dying, but there's many lessons in that for
there
us.
are. It's funny to me too. I don't know how you two have found it, but no matter how long you've been waiting, when the person dies, it's still a surprise.
Yeah.
And people are still surprised.
Yes. Yeah. And didn't we see that at hospice where they'll say, they didn't expect that.
Yeah.
even though maybe yesterday or 2 days ago you were hearing them go like, I'm ready, it's time, we're tired, we want them to let go. And then when it happens, it still feels like a surprise.
Well, because it's not an experience many people have. We don't have a lot of experience of being present when someone dies. I remember working at the hospital once and someone was dying and there were a few staff in the room and the family were all there and it was really the last few minutes, hours. Anyway, but when it got down to it, I remember standing in the room and looking around, and at a certain point I noticed all the staff looked at their watch. And it was just sort of, because everyone was looking, what time is it, right? And I'll bet you a good minute went by before the family realized, is that it? Like, is that it? And it really brought home to us, we're not used to being there. We're not used to being that witness right to the end, right? And through all that hard work, when it happens, you can't believe it's happened. Because it's 1 second and then another, and it's different. Life has changed irreparably or irreconcilably. Whatever that is that thin veil. Once that happens, you've crossed to another side. And we're just not, that's not an experience that many people have had in their lives these days.
It's interesting to me to watch people gather at a vigil, like who comes and how they interact with each other, not just the person who's dying. And I think, again, the one of the strengths of the vigil can be that bringing together of family or friends in a common helplessness, because no matter how many are there, they can't change what's happening. But we're there, so we're there for that person, but we're also there for each other, and I think there's value in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what I was thinking, David, is that it's a way to give and receive support and connection with the person that's dying, but of course with the others and with yourself. And it does provide those quiet moments for yourself, that connection point for you as well. Something that I've heard from family members, in the residents of hospice, I would hear them say, well, I don't know if I'm going to come tomorrow because, I can't do anything. There's nothing that can be done. What are you going to do? Just sit there. And so that idea where I've heard them struggle with, do I just come and sit if the person's not conscious, if they don't need me to help them with something, a task, then where is the value? And of course, there's value in your presence. There's value in your presence for the person that's dying, but there's value for you in bearing witness to that process.
That reminds me, and it depends on the type of people, in terms of, because some can be incredibly heavy. You walk into the room and a heaviness, no one's speaking. It's very quiet. The light is dim and you go, what have I just walked into? And then other times you can come in and the room is a bit lighter and people are talking and eating. I think if you're in the vigil and you're in that process, eat. Make sure that you're eating. You might not be hungry, but you still have to eat. But you come in and you go, oh, the atmosphere here is a bit lighter. And so even in terms of how families do it, how they hold vigil, not that one is better than the other, they're just different. But you can feel it, right?
It's true.
We saw some in hospice, like I remember one that was like a party. Like they were having drinks and they were playing music and that's what felt right for them. And of course we honor that. Yeah.
But some people might find that to be irreverent.
That's right.
Whereas, if it's not more somber, then there's something not right. But it's not that any way is right. It's just that this is how people do it. But that they can have different tones. The vigil can have different tones.
I remember on a very personal note when I was sitting vigil for a friend of mine. She was in the palliative unit before hospice at beds, and her and her husband are both really good friends of mine, and she had been diagnosed in very fast cancer. So I remember going to rounds one morning at the hospital and then popping in to see them in the room and she had been given a palliative sedation. She was unconscious, and my friend, he'd been there for days, and he said to me, I need to go home and get changed and just get cleaned up, but I don't want to leave her alone. And I said, that's fine. I'm happy to sit here, and I'll sit with her, and you go do what you need to do and whatever. And I remember sitting there just holding her hand, and the thought that came to me was two things. One, it's very hard to sit without and suppress the urge to get up and do something where you can interact with somebody. But the other thing after a while, when I allowed myself to be quiet, was to ask myself, what does this dying person need from me? What do they need? And do I possess what they need? And I realized that, yeah, I do. I have what they need. They need somebody who can sit in quietness without and embrace the mystery of this process without answers. They need love, not judgment. They need embrace, not rejection. And I realized, I just went through those things. What is it that this person needs from me? And I need to recognize that those things are present in me, and then I need to live them. But so for me, it's been on a very personal level, probably one of the most profound experiences in terms of, and then of course for me it was, if that's what dying people need from me in that moment, then that's what I need to learn so that I can do those things with living people too. and they need the same things. But it was a very didactic moment for me on one side, that it really was a teaching moment. She taught me a great deal in that vigil, that couple of hours. Yeah.
I hear though that teaching came from that kind of, you felt that restlessness, you felt that helplessness.
Yep.
You weren't sure what to do, but you kind of stayed there and sat through the discomfort of it to then move into a space where you could start asking yourself that question. And of course, that's really hard for us. So often when we're uncomfortable, we move, right? We distract ourselves, we get up, we do something. And so what I hear that was like really pivotal to having that experience was kind of a willingness just to sit in that uncomfortableness.
And it's hard because, as you know, if we walked into rooms where there's vigil going on, everybody's on their phone, and they're totally distracted. There's enough things to find that we can distract ourselves with, but really being present, because this is the last part of this. And I say to people, this person's still alive. This is still part of their living. And can we honor this part of their living until the end? And it is a gift, but it's not an easy one.
Sometimes I think I'll say we labor in, and sometimes we labor out. Sometimes it takes time. Delivery can be a long time for some people. It can be a very short time for others. But that it's a transition. It's a passage from one safe place to an unknown place, right? And to witness that, to be there, does take that ability to be still and be present. And again, not something that we get a lot of practice with in our society. Because, I've been at the bedside. Somehow in that moment, the clock just moves so slowly.
Sure.
And then at the same time, I go, but when the time of death comes, you give anything to have that person back into that slow time, And so inside that, you can have many different emotions. Like, how many times have I heard people say, and this is maybe one of the values of the vigils, is, I just wish they would go, and they'll say, it's okay to go, And I think, wow, that's a gift of that time, because maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago or a month ago, you wouldn't have been able to say that. You wouldn't have been able to journey through that period of time to get to the place to say, you know what? It's okay to go. I'm tired. You're tired. I've gotten to a place where I'm not at peace with it, but I've reconciled to that it's okay to go.
And often it doesn't happen till that time.
Yeah. What can happen then is people feel, I feel guilty for having that thought, and then you got to sort of wrestle with that guilt. But that, but that doesn't take too long to kind of say, but that's okay because you were able to say, it's okay to go, and I think there's power in that in terms of when we come to our grief, we know we were there and we did everything and we gave them a kiss and we sent them on their way. There's power in that. There's something important in that process. That as a person sitting bedside, you get to a place that you didn't think you could probably ever get to, which was it's okay for you to go.
That really brings up some memories and thoughts for me, Red. When my father was dying, my father went from being in very active, treatment where we were still really thinking we could at least prolong his life to there's a really specific moment that now we're moving into palliative care. And from that point, there was only 5 or 6 days till he died. So for me, having those 5 or 6 days, that was part of the value for me, that prior to the vigil, we were running, trying to find answers and when could we meet with the neurosurgeon and the oncologist and the radiation oncologist and what did that nurse say? And we were still full throttle in treatment, right? And so once things shifted, and it shifted very quickly, and he was palliatively sedated, that vigil then became a throttle back and a shift from the full out, okay, like we're in this, we're kind of trying to fight this thing, to no, this is happening. And those days were such a gift to what you were saying around giving me time to really arrive there to a place of acceptance of he is dying, even towards, and then in the last day saying, and now please die. I know you're dying, and so I let you go. If you're staying for us, we let you go. And something that those days really taught me, and again, only in retrospect, one of the things when he was so sick, I had a job, I have young kids. I had one foot in each world. I had one foot in my personal world, and I had one foot in the world of just wanting to really show up for him. And, not doing either one, as well as, of course, I wanted to. And in those last final days, I still remember this. He died on a Monday, and I think it was on the Friday. I remember just saying, okay, I'm all in now. I'm just going to be here. I'm going to sleep here. I'm just going to be here. And there was a relief in saying, I'm going to allow the rest of the world to fade away because I know I don't have a lot of time. So other people can take care of my kids this weekend. I'm not going to work. I'm not going to worry about anything else. I am just going to be here. And he needed that, but I needed that too. I needed to feel like this scrambling that I've been doing for months and the running, both feet are here in this room, in this world now. And so I often say to people, we often think of the vigil as being there for the person, but it's also the experience I want to give myself. And the experience I wanted to give myself is I want it to be all in. I want it to be all in there for him and for me. And so that's one of the things it taught me.
It's interesting because often people will say they don't want to go to the bedside because they don't want to remember the person like this. They don't want to see them like that. And I think that's quite potentially the root of that is I'm not comfortable with the scene.
This is
a scary place, and I don't want to go and see this. Because I said, well, what I'll say, what do you fear? Well, how they'll look. I don't want to remember how they look like this. And I said, well, you probably weren't around when they were a baby. My guess is when they were born, they didn't look like what they looked like when they were 10, and when they were 10, they didn't look like what they looked like when they were 50. There's resemblances, but everybody changes. And this will just be your loved one, this person, at the time of their death. And that memory of what that experience of seeing them will not erase any of your memories, but it will give a full picture of the person's life. And so you can choose to not do it, but if you do, just know that it isn't going to be the only memory that you have left. The way they looked at their time of death is not going to be the image that you remember only, right?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Red. And I think I've often thought too, as I've talked with people and listened to people who say, I don't want to go, I don't want to have that memory of them. And I think, what's it like for any of us? I mean, none of us appreciate being rejected, no matter what we're going through, what's happened to us. That can you just accept me no matter what I'm in or doing is probably put to the greatest challenge at our own dying. But we're still living. This is the living that we are having vigil with, the living until death. And that honors that person, rather than a rejection of them, because of the way they look. It's a sense of, this has been part of your physical journey. This is part of your physical journey. It's probably not what any of us would have thought or maybe could have imagined, but here you are, and I still love and care for you, and I will be here, and my presence with you in this moment is the greatest voice of acceptance rather than rejection.
And it's time-limited opportunity.
Oh, great! You can't get it back either.
No, because once it happens, it happens. You can't get it back. Yeah.
You can miss somebody's birthday one year and say, "Well, I'll make up for it next year." Yeah. But their dying is, and for me, that's a sacred moment. And I don't mean that religiously. I mean that's a moment that has such meaning and power that kind of brings that end to that person's life. And that last bit of it is part of their living, and I honor that with them. It's hard, but it's true. Not everything that's hard should be rejected. Just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not something we should experience.
Yeah, Hallmark doesn't have a belated death card.
Hey, there's something. Maybe we should try that. Yeah.
Belated
sorry, I missed your dying.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't there for you.
So just because it's hard doesn't mean it's wrong. Doesn't mean it doesn't have value. It means it's hard.
It means it's hard. Yeah.
But it can have. If you think about lots of the things we've done in our life that were hard, had incredible value, as does this.
And as you said, Julie, it's often in the reflection of that time. Because yes, what I hear, and you said that earlier, Red, I hear that a lot too. When they're waiting, they're saying, "Okay, it's okay, Dad. It's time for you to go. It's okay." And then, when I see them a week later, it's like, oh, I wish they'd have hung on longer. I really, as hard as it was, at least they were here.
Yeah.
And there's that piece of it too. That, So I think waiting has value that often is seen as we allow it, as we have the ability to reflect back. And that's why I do think that that's a helpful piece of all of this later in our own healing journey, is to take the time to reflect on that one. And as for me, what did I learn out of that? That I want to build into my life. For you, it was, what did you learn? That was that moment of being all in. And that's a powerful lesson.
And those insights aren't immediately obvious.
No.
Right?
No, and I'm sitting here reflecting about how, shortly after that, I actually went into leadership. And of course, then I had some employees, going away because a parent or family member was ill and was dying. And I can't tell you how many times I said, it's not just, I don't want you to just make your decision about when you stop work based on being there for them. What is the experience you want to give yourself in this? And that's what it taught me, right? And I have said that to so many employees in terms of just permission, like give yourself permission to also give yourself what you need here. And so, in other words, you don't need to work till the very last day until you hear that your mom, okay, yes, tomorrow will probably be the day, okay, and so that today will be my last day of work. go earlier if you can.
Exactly.
Go earlier, and you can't go too soon. Yeah, I know there's privilege in me being able to say that, and I know that's a more complicated issue. So I'm not talking about the logistics. I'm more just talking about that inner permission to say you can't go too soon.
It sort of speaks to the fact that, but the idea that when you are sitting at bedside, outside the walls of where you are, wherever that is, the cars are still going by on the street. People are still getting up and going to work. The world continues on as if nothing is happening. But for you, one of the most significant things in the world is happening right here, right now. Doesn't anybody get this? And you talked about that sense of rejection. It often can feel like you've been put in the penalty box, or you're somehow sidelined from life. And that's okay. It's okay to be sidelined, because this is a moment in which the busyness and the getting there as soon as you can is important, or the getting there as soon as you can, but the busyness isn't. The busyness can fall away, because what's truly important in our lives is in this room with us right now. And we're getting ready to say goodbye.
There's a crystallization
Yeah.
that happens.
Yeah.
It crystallizes our.
Yeah. But it can often feel like you're sidelined, but that's okay to be sidelined. Because the world is incredibly intrusive, and it takes, quite a bit of effort to keep it at bay.
Hospice, I remember when my early years at hospice, we had Vigil volunteers. So we had volunteers who committed themselves to doing Vigil when there was no one else to do that. So they would go, and whether it was in the hospital or in nursing homes or at home, they would go and they would spend whatever time needed to be spent. And I thought, wow, what a powerful gift. So what it brings to me too is the value of, for that person, that Vigil is not being alone in this piece either. And it's that sense of not having to do this final piece alone, and having knowledge of someone there in the room. I thought, wow, that's quite a commitment for a volunteer. And they were special people. And pretty... and there are lots of people. I know we used to get, probably the majority of calls came from nursing homes or retirement places where they didn't have family and they were all alone, and the nurses didn't have time to sit with them. But it's important to have that presence from both sides.
It's very touching.
Mm-hmm.
Think about meaningful volunteer work.
Yeah.
It's a privilege and powerful.
It is privilege.
To be present when someone dies.
It goes against everything, in our world, as we've talked about, though. This whole, being productive and where I think it's that sense where when we're alive, we're responsible for giving our life meaning and wanting to do that. But when we're dying, there's not a lot we can do. But that's where, sitting vigil with people gives their life meaning, because we're saying that you matter.
You matter.
You matter.
You matter enough that, as Red said, yes, the cars are still going by and people are still living their life, but my world is going to pause.
Yeah.
And I am going to sit here and be with you and honor this final part of the journey.
And somebody mentioned it earlier. I think that does show up in the grief work. I think that people who have had that vigil experience, I think that the coming to terms with the death itself as being, it's it's happened, of course, and the embracing of that, where there has been vigil. I have found that to be something that's very true and present with people in grief.
I would agree.
Sometimes sometimes grief begins with that. I can't believe they're there. I still don't believe they're dead. In that sense, because it's been a sudden, or it's been cut short, or whatever. But with people who've sat vigil, there is that recognition that not only did death happen, but there was a preparedness for death. in some way.
I mean, we prepare for birth like crazy. And we get ready for 9 months.
Yeah.
And we do all kinds of things. But that preparedness, not that you can ever be fully prepared, but that there is a quality that the vigil offers, that opportunity to be more prepared, to have the opportunity to say and do all the things you would want to say and do, so that when the time comes, you can look back with no regrets. And maybe that's healing a relationship. Maybe that's just forgiveness between a tough relationship. But that can happen in the vigil. It can happen outside the vigil. That's one of the important things. And like you said, in the grief process, it can have some real comfort come to that difficult time as well. There can be those memories looking back and going, I'm glad I did that. That was difficult and I did it. I would trade everything to have that person back, but I can't. And so I'm okay. I'm glad I did that. And you don't know that, like you were saying, Julie, these things come after when we're reflecting. We don't necessarily know in the moment. And so that's another difficult thing. We don't know the value necessarily of what we're doing in the moment. And quite often we only want to do things if we know what the value of that thing is, if we know what we're going to get from it or give to it. And sometimes when those insights don't come till after, it makes it hard to actually do the work in the moment.
I think maybe on that note, we should just comment on what about the vigil when it's been a difficult relationship, when there is a lot of pain or bitterness or anger that's still sitting there, and even the idea of maybe even stopping your life for a while to be with that person, when the person maybe has been a real source of pain for you in your life. And let's just give a few moments to that, because I really want to honor that experience.
I think there's a couple of things. First of all, there is this kind of hallmark idea that death will bring us all together, which we all know doesn't happen. But I also know the other side, and I've witnessed that, where vigil has been an incredible time of healing without needing words, which is the amazing thing to watch. And I've witnessed that at hospice. I remember one where a gentleman had been totally estranged from his family and had really created all kinds of problems. And as he was dying, and those kids his former wife, they were there. And I think for them, it was a healing moment. Now, I don't think that's necessarily true with everyone, nor is it guaranteed to happen that way, but we're giving it a chance. And for me, that's the key, is that there is this potential opportunity, even if the expression is only one way, that you have to say what you need to say. And even if that's to confront them with what they've done, if that needs to happen in the healing of my own journey. But I think those are the pieces that have potential, that it can be.
I just have something more savage going through my head in terms of sometimes there's this satisfaction of witnessing the, I don't want to say it, the bastard's gone, I held up my end of the bargain right to the end. And I saw you through, and maybe I'm going to get comfort from that. But that I know that I committed what I could to this relationship, even though that wasn't necessarily what I got in return. But those are very, very hard vigils to sit through, because I'm sure that every fiber of a person's being can be screaming, "What are you doing here?"
And I've been
does that person really deserve my witness?
Yeah.
Right.
And I've been part of it where the person dying in hospice, wanted to say goodbye to one of their siblings, but did not want them there on the vigil. So there was that, that they had already said, that I do not want this person here in the vigil side, but they did have that moment. So maybe it works both ways there too. I don't know, but it's certainly it. Yeah, I think there's all kinds of things that can come out of it, and we'd be foolish to say it's always going to turn out well because it's not. But I mean, the opportunity for doing something, I think, is there.
And so maybe that's what we're saying. Like when we say there's a value that, and as we said too, like the value or the insights or the gifts can come further down the road. And when we're saying value, it could be just it teaches us something, right? It could be that it's healing. It could be that, Red, as you said, maybe there's just comfort in knowing that the person who hurt us can no longer hurt us and we watch them die. And so that's why we're using that word in the broadest sense. But I think the invitation from this discussion is really like be open to the idea that, pausing life for a few hours or a few days, giving yourself permission to be in that, I call it the space in between, giving yourself, permission to be there, that there's value in that.
And in that sense, this opportunity only comes once, right? It was Gord Downey. This is no dress rehearsal. Like this is your life, and you don't get a second chance to go back at this. And so, that opportunity is a real, capital O opportunity to express, share, heal, do whatever you need to do to make whatever you need to make right with that relationship with that person before they die. Yeah.
And that is the gift that nobody wants to acknowledge, because when someone dies suddenly in an accident or heart attack, we don't have that ability to say goodbye to it.
That's right.
And so, I mean, and it affects the grief both ways. And there's we all know that there's no easy way to die. There's just different ways. But this vigil is, I think that's why for me it's an opportunity. It's a gift.
It's an opportunity. And I think this discussion today is really just putting up the invitation.